Today we're continuing with 2 Samuel. It's kind of interesting that this book is obviously named after Samuel because Samuel has died, kind of returned, not bodily, and then went back to where he was called from. But so we're past the time of Samuel, and we're actually in the time of David. Now, in the Dewey Rayham's version, this was all called the Books of Kings. So anyway, we're in the times of David. And David is now, you saw yesterday that we saw the verse of the Bible that was part of the celebration that ultimately became the root of the movie Footloose. Actually, not the root, but it was quoted in the movie Footloose, where the town high school students. I'm sorry, I just offended every high school student in the world. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I apologize. The town high school students wanted to dance. And the town said no. There was a whole story behind it. A lot of it they focused on religion because there are some Christian religions that believe dancing is a sin. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things I listen for when someone who is Catholic, if they start talking about discipline, do they consider dancing a sin? And I'll have to say that's not Catholic teaching. So anyway, different things like that. So they consider dancing a sin, and therefore it's forbidden in their religion. And of course, these high school students wanted to dance, and they quoted the line in David that we talked about yesterday, where David danced and leaped. The line that was missing is where he danced and leaped before the Ark of the Covenant. And we talked a little bit about liturgical dance, and then we talked about liberation theology in the terms of the latest book that we discussed yesterday on immigration. That's very popular. It's funny. I don't have the book in front of me, so the name just went out of my head. Let me pull the book up right away. I just want to make sure I say it right, as well as the author correctly. And as you know, I'm not necessarily recommending, as a matter of fact, I'm not recommending the book, but let me see. Let me pull this up here. Let me see. The Invisible Cool, Peter Schweitzer. I keep thinking his name is Jerome Schweitzer. I don't know why. But anyway, Peter Schweitzer, where he gave a very skeletal description of Gustavo Gutierrez. We're going to talk more, not so much about Father Gustavo Gutierrez, but we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the stuff I was talking about yesterday. But in today's first reading, we're looking at David telling the Lord that he wants to build him a house, which of course would be a temple. And this is an interesting story because what the Lord is saying, these are things that we have to understand. The Lord is saying, I'm the one that brought you to the place where you are right now. I'm the one that established you as king. I'm the one that took care of all that. If I wanted a house somewhere along the line, I would have asked for one. And the one who communicated this information to David was Nathan, who is David's prophet. Just as Samuel was Saul's prophet, Nathan is David's prophet. So he makes it clear that, look, if I wanted a home, I'd give you a home. I'd build one myself. I don't, we're okay. And so the Ark of the Covenant actually was in a tent, and it stayed there for quite some time. It doesn't end up in the temple until the time of Solomon, when Solomon built the temple. And the Temple Mount is where the temple was, and what the Temple Mount is now is what is left of the temple after the Romans destroyed it. Remember, the temple was destroyed twice, and it has not been rebuilt since the time of the Romans. So the temple was rebuilt twice, and there was important things we can reflect on in light of that. It was destroyed by the Babylonians, and then it was destroyed by the Romans. Now, in Romans in 70 AD. Now, there is an interesting thing there, because we can look at this from 3,000 years later. So what happens? The Lord said, if I wanted the house to be built, I would have had it built. Now he can say to us, if I want the house rebuilt, I will rebuild it. And now you see a whole different understanding. Now, there's supposed to be, as you know, a new temple when Jesus comes back. So maybe that's what we're waiting for right now. But the fact that the temple has not been rebuilt is very significant. It's extremely significant. And that's where people who don't understand the faith, atheists out there, who don't understand the faith will say something like, well, if God was real, he would rebuild the temple. No, the whole point is the temple is not rebuilt, and there is a powerful message in that. By the way, if the temple were to be rebuilt, say it was destroyed in 70 AD, and then we'll say it was rebuilt in 100 AD and continues to exist, they would be doing animal sacrifices every day in the temple, and many groups today would be livid over that. Including among the Jews. So that's an interesting thing, but that's maybe we could say a story for another time. So we're looking at all that, but what's happening here is we see that the Lord is saying, I have established you. Now, and if I need a temple, I'll get one, and I will have a temple someday. And right now I'm establishing your house. Why is all that important? Okay. We know the temple, and the temple's built by Solomon, destroyed by the Babylonians, rebuilt by Cyrus the Persian, destroyed by the Romans. But in the meantime, is there another temple? And the answer to the question is yes. And that is Mary, who becomes Theotokos, the God-bearer. That's Greek, meaning God-bearer. And if you go to an Orthodox church, and maybe some of the what we call uniate churches, which I obviously haven't been in many. A uniate church is a church that is united to the Pope in Rome. It is considered Catholic, but it's not Roman Catholic. So there's Coptic Catholics, there's Melkite Catholics, there's Maronite Catholics, there's different forms of Catholics. And so we see those understandings of Catholics, and very common, especially we can also see it in Orthodox Christianity, which is not united to Rome. The idea of Theotokos as well. Theotokos means God-bearer. Who is the God-bearer? Mary. So who becomes, in a sense, the third temple? We understand the temple was destroyed twice, rebuilt rebuilt once, but it existed. You had the first one, then it was destroyed. Then you had the second one, then it was destroyed. Who is the third temple? That is Mary. So that's another thing people say, well, you Catholics and Mary. Yeah, and it's also the Orthodox, because we understand Mary had a special role, and part of it is Theotokos. So when we're back to this reading and we're seeing that the Lord is saying to David through Nathan that when there is time to establish a house, I will do that, we can also see a hint that he's referring to Mary as well, because what the Lord is doing is, when he says a house, he means it literally, but then he also says house in the term of the lineage of David. And so as we look at that, we see this is important. The Lord is saying, this is all my work. I am taking care of this. So when it's time for me to have a temple, I will have a temple. And that's powerful because we're talking about ultimately Mary. And remember, that whole message of Mary being the enmity, her offspring being the enmity to the serpent, is, of course, referring to Mary and Jesus in the beginning, in the book of Genesis, which is still followed right to today. Now, there's an interesting thing to look at, by the way, because we understand that message. Now, you do know no one was in the Garden of Eden writing this down. I saw the movie Chosen, and no, I didn't. I saw parts. I haven't seen the TV show. I haven't watched the TV show at all. I guess it's a TV show, not a movie, whatever. I haven't seen the TV show at all. And you might say, well, why haven't you seen the TV show? Because I've read the book. It's true. That's true. When Jesus of Nazareth came out. So you're going to watch Jesus of Nazareth, which I had seen and I enjoyed. But people, when they showed it again and again, you're going to watch it again? No, I read the book. So in any case, there is a scene. I don't know if it's all through the show because I've only seen a tiny clip of the show. They show one of the apostles writing. We have no idea if that happened, but we do know that those writings of any apostle do not exist. What? But what about the Gospels? The Gospels were written many years later. That's important. That's an important distinction because the Jesus words may have been written down, but Jesus didn't write them, and he didn't have a secretary writing everything down. Why is that important? St. Augustine taught that, and as did also St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas quoting Augustine, because he said, Augustine, that if all the words of Jesus were written down, then our understanding of the teachings of Jesus would become very superficial. That's why we don't have the writings of Jesus, because he wouldn't want us to be, well, Jesus said on this day, that means this, because then our faith would be very superficial. We call that fundamentalism. And that's why we as Catholics don't believe in sola scriptura. I know for some people I may have offended them. We don't believe, and I don't mean to, I'm sorry, but we don't believe in sola scriptura. That's why, because it gives line to fundamentalism. What is sola scriptura? Only the Bible is our revelation. But what happens is then people only follow what the Bible says, and they don't understand the greater dynamic that comes from tradition and the Bible, and even some of the words in the Bible that tell you not to follow other words in the Bible. Where does it say that, Father? St. Paul talked about it all the time. Isn't it funny? I have this whole crowd here. Look at them all. You know that that's me. I know you know that. But in any case, but why do we have, why don't we go, this is what fundamentalism, and what are those parts of the Bible that says don't follow the other parts of the Bible? How does that make any sense? St. Paul. St. Paul said we no longer follow the Jewish law. That means that's why the rules of Leviticus don't apply except as they were affirmed in the New Testament. So you may have some people who will state straightforward. They will state, they will start reading some of the laws of Leviticus and condemn people and whatever the case means, that people should be stoned to death and all this other stuff. And what we're understanding is a whole new set of rules that are bring in the love and mercy of God. So Paul throws out the Jewish law to be replaced by the new law, which is written on our hearts. But he calls people who may be committing the same sins that Leviticus says those people should be stoned to death. He calls them to repent, to turn from sin. And in one particular case, we have someone who was someone who was living with his stepmother, in every sense of the term. Paul says, cast them to Satan, so that they will experience suffering, and in doing so, they may repent. That's a whole different ballgame than stone them to death. Paul never says that. So all those rules in Leviticus that people say, and if we do that, then we have to stone these people to death, and those people, no. All those don't apply. They haven't applied since the time of St. Paul. So we're living in a new time, and that new time was established by the death and resurrection of Jesus, which is being very obliquely prophesied at this time, because God is saying to David that time is going to come. You don't worry. I'm the one that established your kingdom. If I want a house, I'll establish a house. And he ultimately not only establishes the temple, he establishes the house of David, which is the lineage, and he also establishes the third temple, and the third temple is Mary as Theotokos. We're going to be talking more on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to subscribe, to like, to spread the word. And we'll be back right after this. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. Yesterday we talked about Gustavo Gutierrez, and I thought I would discuss a little bit further the understanding of what the church teaches in light of some of the teachings that came from Peter Schweitzer in his book on immigration. Let me bring that up again real quick. And let me bring up the title so that I can go back and tell it to you. It's called The Invisible Coup. And, I'm not talking about his book per se, but I really didn't like what he wrote about the relationship between the Vatican and Gustavo Gutierrez. And there's a reason for that, and it really reflects what I believe, and maybe Peter Schweitzer is wrong. I don't believe that he understood the background of liberation theology. Now, I have told you before, I am not someone who subscribes to the ideas of liberation theology per se. Now, there is, and he doesn't bring this out either, there is a form of liberation theology that comes from the Vatican. And that form of liberation theology understands the prime liberation is liberation from sin. So what we have here is this understanding. Now, what they did, and maybe this Peter Schweitzer, I don't know anything about him, but you know that in the more traditional circles of the Catholic Church, people hated Pope Francis. They absolutely hated him. And I had said from day one, I talked to an editor, and I spoke to him, and didn't really care. But I had said from day one that Pope Francis would be different because Pope Francis is American. Father, he's not from the United States. That's right. He's from Argentina, which is in the Americas. So he was American. And so we can understand that he would have a different perspective. Now, the other thing is he said, well, Gustavo Gutierrez, this is Peter Schweitzer, spoke with Pope Francis and he met with him in the Vatican. So what? Because here's the thing that Peter Schweitzer doesn't bring up, at least from what I've read. Maybe he brings it up elsewhere in the book. Gustavo Gutierrez was not corrected by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, which back then would have been called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Although other liberation theologians were. And one of them was John Sobrino. John is Jon. And John Sobrino was a liberation theologian, and he was teaching that form of liberation theology that Peter Schweitzer does not like is liberation from economic models that dehumanize people. But what the Vatican criticized with John Sobrino is that his Christology, which is the study of Christ and who Christ is and how we define Christ, they didn't agree with his Christology, because they really basically now this is my word, not anyone else's. They basically said that he created a form of Arianism where Jesus as human and Jesus as God were somewhat separate. And so they disagreed with that. So they mostly disagreed with him on his Christology, which is significant, by the way. You might say, well, that's just how you look at Christ. No, that's pretty significant because that's the baseline of what we believe. But in 1979, there was a conference in Puebla, Mexico. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. And the person, you can rest assured, Gustavo Gutierrez was there. He was from Peru. And so what you might say is, who gave the opening speech at the Puebla conference? First of all, who convened the Puebla? Who's the one who said you need to have a Puebla conference? None other than Pope Paul VI. And after his death, and then you have the new Pope, the conference happened. And Pope John Paul II, who was brand new as Pope, spoke out, and he was the one who gave the opening talk at the Puebla conference. Now, the Puebla conference defined that one of the greatest issue affecting the people of South America is poverty, and it's an extreme poverty. And part of the reason why you have poverty is because you have these people suffering from a tremendous debt. The country's tremendously in debt, and this is a problem. You know, I was in a mall the other day, and this mall was really just a shiny mall. As a matter of fact, there's a channel. I should look up the name of the channel. There is a channel that kind of talks about dead malls. It talks about dead malls. You know, are they dead? Is it a dead mall? Is it a live mall? Is it dying? What's the story? And this was an alive, very fascinating mall. And now, not only are the stores closed, except for a few are open, including Macy's. A few of the stores are open, but the escalators don't work. So if you need to go to the third floor, you have to walk up the escalator because the escalator doesn't work. And if you know me well, there's nothing that irritates me more than escalators that don't work. Usually in the case, well, we're fixing the escalator. Oh, that's wonderful. You can't do that when the store is closed. I really hate that. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. There was a time during COVID, the stores are no longer open. During COVID, so you didn't want to be in a small space. They had to fix the escalator during open hours when the grocery store was open. It was a grocery store with two floors, Wegmans and Natick, which is no longer there. And so the only way you could go from floor to floor, which you would have to do with a shopping cart, was in an elevator when a time they said, don't be in small spaces. It absolutely sends me through the roof when I walk into a store and they're fixing the elevator during open, store hours. It drives me nuts. I should interview someone. Why do you do that? So in any case, I always want to write a story about that. Why do they do that? So the escalator, at least one escalator that's out of, remember, you have to have an up one and a down one. So you have like 4 escalators. One is working out of the 4. But in any case, now I really went on a tangent. But if you go to South America and you go to a mall, they look like these dying or dead malls. A lot of stores are empty because there's a lot of poverty out there, a lot of business isn't happening there. And this is one of the things that actually Pope John Paul II said, these are important things that we need to change. But you change them through a more, this is my word, holistic understanding of what we need to do. We bring the message of Christ who wants to bring, what is the message of St. Irenaeus? Be fully human, fully alive. That's what God is calling us to. And that means people, every person having the full dignity and allowed to experience the fullness of human life. As a matter of fact, one of the lines, this is from section 3, Roman numeral 3.5. This is Pope John Paul II. we cry out once more, respect man. He is the image of God. Evangelize so that this may become a reality, so that the Lord may transform hearts and humanize the political and economic systems with man's responsible commitment as a starting point. So that's the response of, that is the response of liberation theology from the Vatican's point of view. And that is, we're called to build a society rooted in who we truly are as human beings, and let human beings build a society that makes human beings flourish. What is the greatest source of problems in our world? Rich versus poor. One of the things that the church had a problem with is Marxist analysis. And whenever anyone uses a term and they don't really define it well, that means they have no idea what it means. So let me tell you, Marxist analysis really gets into criticisms of different economic systems and the rich and the poor and everything else. But remember, the church is called to save all people, rich and poor. So the rich are called to use their money in a way that supports the poor, and the poor are called to live in such a way that they experience the fullness of their dignity, which may be greater than what the rich know. And Jesus taught that many times. So let's talk about that for a second, where you have that understanding. So what true liberation theology calls is to help people understand their true value and to live it and to experience it and to build economic systems and political systems and cultural systems that bring the fullness of humanity into existence. Family fire refers to a shooting that results from someone misusing an unsecured firearm from the home. Unintentional shootings, firearm suicide, and many intentional shootings are all forms of family fire. You can protect your loved ones and yourself from the threat of family fire by storing your guns more securely. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady and the Ad Council, and the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer, previews of upcoming podcasts, previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com, your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. So I hope you understand a little bit more of the issues behind this, which I don't believe Peter Schweitzer really understood, or at least if he understood, he didn't write in a way that reflects that. He's talking about how immigration, and you can rest assured this is a small amount of immigration per se, and I'm not criticizing states' rights to take care of its borders and all that. I'm not doing that. I'm just, if you're going to write something about a subject, make sure you get the subject right. And that's my criticism. He gives a very biased version of what the church teaches, of what Gustavo Gutierrez teaches in regards to liberation theology. And at the same time, he really doesn't bring in, at least from what I've read, now there's more to go, any of the criticisms they had of other liberation theologies, including, he mentions that the Leonardo Boff was silenced, but he doesn't explain why, and maybe I should go into that. But you see that we're called to live our faith in such a way that it brings people to humanization. And when we don't do that, then you have very human philosophies that dehumanize people. Remember, communism and Nazism are both atheist philosophies, and both of them dehumanize people intensely, as we understand. They both had their own genocides because they dehumanize people, and we're called to humanize people. We're going to talk more tomorrow. Have yourself a blessed day, and we will see you then. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.